I stared in disbelief at the small rectangular box nestled between the seats of Trent's car. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out, the burgundy velvet glinting under the dim garage light. This was the anniversary gift I had been eagerly anticipating for weeks, the one that never materialized. Lifting the lid, I felt my heart sink. Inside lay a sparkling diamond necklace, the price tag still attached. A small note scrawled on the box's inner lining read, "To my darling Clara, love Trent." My vision blurred as tears welled up. How could this be happening? We had been married for 15 years, and Trent and I had built a comfortable life together. Or so I had thought. This gift, this betrayal, shattered that illusion. As I sank onto the cold cement floor, a crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. Unfolding it, I found a child's drawing, crudely depicting a family of 3, a woman, a man, and a young girl. At the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Daddy Trent." The pieces fell into place. Trent's late nights at the office, his constant excuses to be away from home, he had another family, another life that he was leading behind my back. All those years I had proudly called myself his wife, the mother of his children. It was all a lie. Rage bubbled within me, threatening to consume me. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there. But instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. I needed to gather more evidence, to uncover the full extent of his betrayal, before I confronted him. Carefully, I placed the necklace and the drawing back in the box, tucking it into my purse. As I made my way back to the house, I could feel the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me. How could I face Trent now, knowing what I knew? The trust we had built over the years, the foundation of our marriage, had crumbled. That night, as Trent sat across the dinner table from me, chatting amiably about his day, I struggled to maintain my composure. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I held my tongue. I needed to be strategic, to plan my next move carefully. After the children had been put to bed, I followed Trent into the living room where he settled into his favorite armchair, flipping on the TV. Taking a seat beside him, I cleared my throat. "Trent, we need to talk." He glanced up, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong, honey?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "I found something in your car today, something that belongs to someone else." Trent's eyes widened and a flicker of panic crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" "The anniversary gift you never gave me," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "The one you bought for your mistress, Clara." Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there frozen, his guilt etched on his features. "And that's not all," I continued, pulling the drawing from my purse and thrusting it at him. "Who's this little girl, Trent? Another one of your secrets." Trent's face paled, and he ran a hand through his hair, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. "Rena, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped, holding up a hand to silence him. "I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, the finality of my statement sending a chill through the room. Trent stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. In that moment, I knew this was the end of our marriage, the end of the life I had known. But I was done being the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny. The tension in the room was palpable as Trent and I stared at each other, the silence punctuated only by the muffled sound of the television. I could see the cogs turning in his mind, scrambling to come up with some feeble excuse, but I was done listening to his lies. "Well?" I snapped, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Trent cleared his throat, his eyes darting around the room, anywhere but meeting my gaze. "Rena, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Sorry?" I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea how much this hurts? How much you've betrayed me and our family?" He winced, his shoulders slumping, and I knew I had struck a nerve. "Good. Let him feel the weight of his actions." "It's not what you think," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It's a complicated situation." I let out a humorless laugh. "Complicated? Trent, you're having an affair and you've got another child. How is that in any way complicated?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his brow furrowed in a futile attempt to find the right words. I watched as the realization dawned on him. There was no way to spin this, no way to make it sound even remotely acceptable. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Say? I leaned forward, my eyes blazing with fury. How about you start by admitting that you're a liar and a cheater, that you've been living a double life, betraying our marriage and our family? Trent flinched, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Good. Let him feel the weight of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, reaching out to me. I know this looks bad, but don't you dare touch me, I snarled, jerking away from his outstretched hand. You lost the right to do that the moment you decided to stick your dick in someone else. Trent's face flushed, and he opened and closed his mouth a few times, like a fish out of water. I took a grim satisfaction in seeing him squirm, his usual air of confidence and control completely shattered. I don't know what to say, he finally managed, his voice trembling. That's the problem, Trent, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. You've said enough. Now it's time for you to listen. I reached into my purse and pulled out the box containing the diamond necklace, tossing it onto his lap. This is your darling Clara's gift, isn't it? And this, I dropped the child's drawing on top of the box, is your other family, isn't it? Trent stared at the items, his face a mask of shame and guilt. I watched as he ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic I had come to recognize over the years. Rena, I can explain. No, I cut him off, my voice firm. I don't want your explanations. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of fear in them. Good. Let him be afraid. A divorce? He sputtered. But what about Evelyn? You can't just abandon her. She needs us. I felt my jaw tighten, the mention of my insufferable mother-in-law only fueling my anger. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your problem now. I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to take responsibility for your actions. Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperation, and I knew in that moment that the balance of power had shifted. I was no longer the victim, but the one in control. In the days that followed my confrontation with Trent, I felt a sense of renewed purpose. The initial shock and heartbreak had given way to a steely determination to take control of my life. I started freelancing again, leveraging my marketing expertise to build up a stable income stream. Trent, of course, was less than thrilled about this, insisting that my place was at home, caring for Evelyn and the children. Rena, you can't just abandon your responsibilities, he would argue, his brow furrowed in frustration. Evelyn needs you, and the kids need a stable home. I would simply fix him with a hard stare, my lips pressed into a thin line. Trent, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm taking care of myself for a change. You can handle Evelyn and the children. After all, you seem to have plenty of experience juggling multiple families. The jab would instantly wipe the self-righteous expression off his face, and he would sulk off, muttering under his breath. I took a grim satisfaction in knowing that I had the upper hand now, that I held the power to make his life just as miserable as he had made mine. As I worked tirelessly, building up my freelance business, I also made it a point to thoroughly document Trent's misdeeds. I combed through our financial records, uncovering a trail of suspicious expenses. Expensive dinners, lavish gifts, even a down payment on a second apartment. It was clear that Trent had been pouring a significant amount of our family's resources into maintaining his secret life with Clara. Armed with this evidence, I began to quietly siphon funds into a separate account, stashing away money for my own future. Trent, of course, remained blissfully unaware of my activities, too focused on his own devious schemes to pay much attention to our household finances. As Evelyn's health continued to decline, Trent's neglect of her became increasingly evident. I would often arrive home to find the house in disarray, Evelyn's needs unattended to. It infuriated me, but I remained outwardly calm, biding my time and carefully planning my next move. One particularly trying day, I arrived home to find Evelyn sitting in her wheelchair, her hair disheveled and her clothes stained. Trent was nowhere to be seen, and when I asked Evelyn where he was, she merely shrugged, her eyes glazed over with a mix of confusion and resentment. "That no-good son of mine is off doing God knows what," she grumbled, her voice laced with bitterness, "leaving me here to rot, just like he does every day." I bit my tongue, swallowing the retort that threatened to spill out. Instead, I gently helped Evelyn into the bathroom, carefully bathing and dressing her. As I brushed her hair, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the old woman. Beneath her caustic exterior, she was just as much a victim of Trent's betrayal as I was. Later that night, as Trent stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and the familiar scent of Clara's perfume, I confronted him. "Trent, we need to talk about Evelyn. She's not doing well, and you're hardly ever here to help." He waved a dismissive hand, his gaze unfocused. "Evelyn's fine, Rena. She's got you to take care of her, doesn't she? That's what you're here for, after all." I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Trent, this isn't sustainable. Evelyn needs more attention and care than I can provide on my own. We need to start looking into assisted living options for her." Trent's eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "Absolutely not. I'm not putting my mother in some home. She belongs here, with her family." "Then you need to start being a part of this family, Trent," I retorted, my voice strained. "Evelyn is your responsibility too, and you're failing her just as much as you're failing me and the kids." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm done discussing this. I've already started looking into options for Evelyn, and I'll be making the necessary arrangements, with or without your input." Trent glared at me, his jaw clenched, but I could see the hint of fear in his eyes. He knew I was serious, that I was no longer willing to be the dutiful wife and caretaker. I was taking control of my own life, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. As Evelyn's demands grew more and more taxing, I found myself increasingly isolated. Trent's disinterest in his mother's care only intensified, and he spent more and more time with Clara, leaving me to shoulder the burden alone. I would come home to find Evelyn in her wheelchair, her medications scattered on the floor, and her dinner untouched. She would berate me endlessly, her sharp tongue lashing out with a venomous fury that only added to my exhaustion. "Where's that useless son of mine?" she would snarl, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Off gallivanting with his whore, no doubt. And you, Rena, you're just as useless, letting this place fall to pieces." I would grit my teeth, biting back the retort that threatened to spill out. Instead, I would silently tend to Evelyn's needs, carefully administering her medications and ensuring she was fed and comfortable. It was a thankless task, but I knew I had to keep my composure if I wanted to execute my plan. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Trent burst through the front door, his face flushed and his eyes wild. "Rena, we need to talk," he announced, his voice quivering with a strange mixture of panic and excitement. I turned to face him, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "What is it, Trent?" He took a deep breath, his gaze darting around the room as if he was afraid someone might overhear. "It's Clara. She's pregnant." I felt my heart drop, the dish towel slipping from my grasp as a wave of nausea washed over me. Of course, I had suspected as much, but hearing the confirmation still hit me like a punch to the gut. "Pregnant?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I suppose you're the father." Trent nodded, a strange glint of pride in his eyes. Yes, I am. And I want you to leave, Rena. I want a divorce. I want to be with Clara and our child." I stared at him, my mind reeling. After all this time, after all the pain and betrayal, he had the audacity to demand a divorce on his terms, as if I was some inconvenience to be discarded. "You want me to leave?" I repeated, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You're the one who's been having an affair, Trent. You're the one who's been living a double life and betraying our family, and now you have the nerve to tell me to leave?" Trent held up his hands, a placating gesture. "Rena, please, try to understand. This is my chance to start a new life, to be a father to my child. I can't be tied down to you and Evelyn anymore." I felt my fingers curl into fists, my nails digging into the palms of my hands. Tied down? Is that how you see me, Trent? As some burden to be cast aside? He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, my voice rising in pitch. "No, Trent, you don't get to make this decision for me. I'm the one who's been betrayed, who's been left to pick up the pieces of your selfish, despicable actions. And I'm not going anywhere." Trent's eyes widened, and he took a step back, as if he had not anticipated my vehement refusal. "Rena, you don't understand," he tried to explain, his voice tinged with desperation. "This is my chance to be happy, to have the family I always wanted." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. The family you always wanted? Trent, you already had a family. You had a wife and children who loved you, and you threw that all away for some cheap affair and a mistress who's now carrying your child. Trent's face flushed and he opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand, silencing him. No, Trent, you made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. I'm not leaving and I'm not giving you a divorce. You're going to have to deal with me, with Evelyn, and with the mess you've created. The finality in my tone seemed to hit Trent like a physical blow, and he stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly. I could see the realization dawning on him, that he had underestimated my resilience, my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. In that moment, I felt a surge of power, a sense of control that I hadn't experienced in years. Trent was no longer the one in charge. I was. And I was going to use that power to bring him down, to make him pay for the pain he had caused. The tension in the house was palpable as Trent and I faced off, our once loving marriage reduced to a battlefield of accusation and recrimination. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Think about what you're doing. Think about our family, our children." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "Our family, Trent? Don't you mean your family with Clara?" I paused, pinning him with a hard stare. "And as for the children, I'm doing this for them. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking that this kind of betrayal is acceptable." Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. "I have evidence, Trent," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I've been documenting everything, your financial misdeeds, your neglect of Evelyn, your affair with Clara, and I'm going to use it all against you." His eyes widened and I could see the color drain from his face. "Rena, you can't." "I can and I will," I interrupted, my resolve hardening. "You've betrayed me, Trent. You've betrayed our family, and now you're going to pay the price." Trent ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I had come to recognize over the years. "Rena, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out, I promise." I shook my head, unwavering. "No, Trent, there's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce, and I want it now." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly, as the full weight of my demand sank in. But what about Evelyn?" he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just abandon her, Rena. She needs us." I felt a surge of anger at his pathetic attempt to manipulate me. "Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your responsibility, not mine. You're the one who's been neglecting her, not me." Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and unyielding. "No, Trent. I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. And as for the children, I'll be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms." Trent's face twisted with a mixture of shock and fury. "You can't do this, Rena. You can't take my children away from me." I held up the manila envelope I had been clutching, the evidence of his misdeeds tucked neatly inside. "I can, and I will, Trent, unless you want me to expose your affair and your financial misdeeds to your family, your friends, and your employer." Trent's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll do anything. Just don't do this." I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "It's too late for that, Trent. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Trent standing in the middle of the living room, his world crumbling around him. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny, even if it meant destroying the man I had once loved. The air was thick with tension as Trent and I faced off in the middle of the living room, the evidence of his betrayal clutched tightly in my hand. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Think about what you're doing. Think about our family, our children." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "Our family, Trent? Don't you mean your family with Clara?" I paused, pinning him with a hard stare. "And as for the children, I'm doing this for them. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking that this kind of betrayal is acceptable. Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. I have evidence, Trent, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I've been documenting everything. Your financial misdeeds, your neglect of Evelyn, your affair with Clara, and I'm going to use it all against you. His eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from his face. Rena, you can't. I can, and I will, I interrupted, my resolve hardening. You've betrayed me, Trent. You've betrayed our family, and now you're going to pay the price. Trent ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I had come to recognize over the years. Rena, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out, I promise. I shook my head, unwavering. No, Trent, there's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce, and I want it now. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly as the full weight of my demand sank in. But what about Evelyn? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't just abandon her, Rena. She needs us. I felt a surge of anger at his pathetic attempt to manipulate me. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your responsibility, not mine. You're the one who's been neglecting her, not me. Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and unyielding. No, Trent, I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. And as for the children, I'll be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms. Trent's face twisted with a mixture of shock and fury. You can't do this, Rena. You can't take my children away from me. I held up the manila envelope I had been clutching, the evidence of his misdeeds tucked neatly inside. I can, and I will, Trent, unless you want me to expose your affair and your financial misdeeds to your family, your friends, and your employer. Trent's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll do anything, just don't do this. I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. It's too late for that, Trent. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Trent standing in the middle of the living room, his world crumbling around him. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny, even if it meant destroying the man I had once loved. As I made my way to the bedroom, I could hear Trent's desperate calls echoing behind me. Rena, please, don't do this. Think of the children. But I refused to look back, my mind set on the path I had chosen. Once in the bedroom, I locked the door and sank down onto the bed, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope. The evidence was damning. Bank statements, credit card records, even tawdry love letters from Clara. I could feel my heart racing as I sorted through the papers, my resolve hardening with each passing moment. I knew that what I was about to do would change everything, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. Trent had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. With a deep breath, I began making the necessary phone calls, to my lawyer, to Trent's family, to his employer. The words spilled out of me, my voice calm and steady as I laid bare the full extent of Trent's betrayal. As the news of his affair and financial misdeeds began to spread, I could feel the balance of power shifting. Trent's world was crumbling around him, and I took a grim satisfaction in knowing that I was the one who had brought him down. In the aftermath, Trent pleaded with me, begging for a second chance, but I refused to budge. I was done being the dutiful wife, the silent sufferer. It was time for me to take control of my own life, even if it meant sacrificing the man I had once loved. As the divorce proceedings began, I steeled myself for the battles to come. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to fight for my freedom, for my children, and for the life I deserved. The divorce proceedings were a whirlwind of emotions and legal maneuvering, but I remained steadfast in my determination to reclaim my life. Trent, once the confident breadwinner of our family, now found himself on the defensive, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of my evidence. During the heated negotiations, Trent made one last-ditch effort to sway me, appealing to my sense of duty and responsibility. Rena, think of Evelyn, he pleaded, his eyes desperate. She needs us, both of us. You can't just abandon her. I leveled him with a cold stare, the memories of his neglect and betrayal fueling my resolve. Evelyn is your responsibility, Trent, not mine. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and they don't include your family. Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. No, Trent, I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. As for the children, I will be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms. The color drained from Trent's face, and I could see the panic setting in. He knew that he had lost, that the once formidable control he had wielded over our lives was slipping through his fingers. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and produced a set of keys. Fine, Rena. Take the house. Take the kids, but promise me you'll at least let me see them occasionally. I regarded him coolly, my lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, Trent, but understand this. I will not tolerate any more of your lies or your betrayals. If you so much as set a foot out of line, I will make your life a living hell. Trent flinched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, he mumbled. As the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had reclaimed my freedom, yes, my independence, and my children. Trent, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. With the help of my lawyer, I exposed the full extent of Trent's infidelity and financial misdeeds to his family, his friends, and his employer. The fallout was swift and merciless, as Trent found himself shunned by those he had once counted as allies. His job, his social standing, and even his relationship with his own mother, Evelyn, who had once been his staunchest defender, all crumbled around him. I watched with a grim satisfaction as he spiraled into a pit of despair, his once confident demeanor reduced to a shadow of its former self. As for Evelyn, she too was forced to confront the reality of her son's failures. With Trent no longer able to provide for her, she reluctantly agreed to move into an assisted living facility, where she would receive the care and attention she so desperately needed. I knew that my decision to leave Trent and divorce him would not be an easy one, but as I settled into our new home with my children, I felt a sense of peace and empowerment that I hadn't experienced in years. I was no longer the victim, but the victor, and I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my career, reconnecting with friends, and providing a stable, loving environment for my children. Trent, meanwhile, struggled to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, his attempts at reconciliation falling on deaf ears. As I watched him spiral downward, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. But it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of relief and liberation that I felt. I was finally free, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the dust settled on my divorce from Trent, I found myself emerging from the ashes of our shattered marriage with a newfound sense of purpose and freedom. Gone were the days of constantly worrying about Evelyn's demands, Trent's infidelity, and the responsibilities that had once weighed me down. I threw myself into rebuilding my career, leveraging my marketing expertise to secure a series of lucrative freelance contracts. The extra income allowed me to provide a comfortable life for my children and to focus on my own well-being after years of putting everyone else first. Trent, on the other hand, continued to spiral downward. His dismissal from his high-profile job, coupled with the public humiliation of his affair and financial misdeeds, left him a shell of his former self. I watched with a mixture of pity and satisfaction as he struggled to find his footing, his once confident demeanor reduced to a desperate plea for forgiveness. "Rena, please," he begged during one of our court-ordered mediation sessions, his eyes bloodshot and his voice trembling. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right. Can't we work something out?" I regarded him coolly, my arms crossed over my chest. "Work something out, Trent? You had your chance to make things right, and you chose to betray me and our family instead." I paused, shaking my head. "No, Trent, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your actions." Trent opened his mouth to protest, but the mediator quickly intervened, steering the conversation back to the matter at hand, the custody and financial arrangements. In the end, I was granted full custody of our children, with Trent relegated to supervised visitation. He was also required to provide a significant portion of his income as child support, a consequence he clearly resented, but was powerless to fight. As I left the courthouse, my children in tow, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and empowerment. The nightmare of my marriage to Trent was finally over, and I was free to rebuild my life on my own terms. Over the next few months, I focused on establishing a stable and nurturing environment for my children. We moved into a cozy apartment, and I made sure to set aside dedicated time for family activities and outings. The kids, who had once been caught in the crossfire of Trent's betrayal, slowly began to blossom, their laughter and joy a testament to the healing power of a loving, stable home. Trent, meanwhile, continued to struggle. He lost his job, his savings depleted by the divorce and child support payments. Evelyn, abandoned by both Trent and Clara, had no choice but to enter an assisted living facility, a decision that only added to Trent's woes. I heard through the grapevine that Trent had tried to reach out to Clara, hoping to rekindle their relationship, but she wanted nothing to do with him. Apparently, even the woman he had betrayed his family for had decided that he was more trouble than he was worth. As I watched Trent's downward spiral, I felt a sense of vindication, but also a twinge of pity. He had lost everything: his family, his career, his social standing. And while a part of me couldn't help but feel a measure of satisfaction in his comeuppance, another part of me recognized the pain and anguish he must be experiencing. But I quickly pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the bright future that lay ahead of me and my children. We had weathered the storm of Trent's betrayal, and we were stronger for it. And as I looked towards the horizon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation for what the future had in store.
I'm Cheryl, and I gained 5 at the start of last year as a result of overindulging in upscale cuisine. I'm currently 49 years old and attempting to reduce my weight in time for the holidays. My goal is to shed 5 now so that it won't be a huge concern if I put them back on over the holidays. Correct. You had to be joking. From Christmas until New Year's, there is an abundance of delectable cuisine. Having this difficulty makes you joyful. It's likely that I will also purchase Valentine's Day chocolates for myself. Oh my, I'm drooling already. It appears that I will put on weight this year once more. Well, anything. Today, I have a story from winter that I'd like to share with you. It's about something that happened when I was 28 years old. After dating for several years, my boyfriend Paul and I got engaged, and I introduced him to my parents. This was the so-called marriage greeting. My parents liked Paul, and everything was supposed to go smoothly. But then my older sister Laura, who was 3 years older than me, came home from work, and there was an issue. She became fixated on Paul. It's strange, but when you're sisters, you can sense each other's feelings. I could tell right away that she had fallen in love with Paul the moment she saw him. I hoped it was just a fleeting crush, but when she shook his hand, she blushed and held on a little too long. Even when she talked to him, there was this dreamy look in her eyes. I didn't think it was right for her to act like that toward my fiancé, but maybe she didn't even realize she was doing it. Emotions can be hard to control, so I decided to pretend I didn't notice, hoping my sister wouldn't act on her feelings. However, after Paul left, my sister, fresh out of the bath and still wrapped in a towel, confronted me. "You should call off the engagement," she said. According to her, Paul was a womanizer, and I could find someone better. She kept criticizing him, but she didn't have any real reason for saying that. "Why do you think he's a player?" I asked her. "It's a woman's intuition," she replied. The thing is, my sister has never had a boyfriend, so how could I trust her woman's intuition when she has no experience with men? I decided I should trust Paul, whose character I've known for years. I casually brushed off my sister's advice, saying, "Yeah, I'll be careful," without taking it too seriously. After that, Paul started visiting our home often. He said he wanted to build a good relationship with my family, so I invited him over, feeling comfortable about it. My parents were happy, and I hoped Paul would get along well with them, since he was going to be my husband. But while things should have been going smoothly, my sister had other ideas. She tried to get close to Paul in a different way. According to Paul, when I wasn't around, she would grab his arm, press her chest against him, and ask, "Don't you think Marion is a bit immature?" She even asked for his contact details, and once purposely fell down in a way that exposed her underwear. Paul said it was so over the top that it was actually funny, but I would have been worried if he was the kind of man to take it seriously. My sister believed she had a chance because Paul couldn't directly reject her since she was my sister. Every time they met, she would approach him with a sweet voice, saying, "Hey." It started with her falling in love at first sight, but it didn't help that Paul worked for a big company, which made him even more appealing to her. She told me, "He's reliable, has a face I like, and seems like the kind of man who can provide security for the future." She was completely taken by him. My parents saw all of this happening, but said nothing. In fact, it wasn't unusual for them to stay quiet when it came to my sister's actions. Honestly, she's always been the type who struggles with things. For example, if she's asked to warm up food, she might accidentally use a plastic dish that isn't heat-resistant, and it melts. She wasn't good at studying either, or at sports. She often skipped swimming class by making excuses like hurting her foot, feeling unwell, or having skin problems. She wasn't great at schoolwork, sports, or even household chores. And to be honest, she's not particularly good-looking either. Still, because she's the eldest daughter, my parents always treated her differently, giving her special treatment. They even quietly pushed the responsibility of supporting her onto me. I was constantly told to make sure she stood out, but without drawing attention to myself. It felt unfair to be treated so differently as siblings, but I guess my parents saw her as someone who couldn't do much on her own and felt sorry for her. On the other hand, I've always been the type to do things quickly and efficiently. Maybe the adults didn't see much value in helping someone who could handle everything themselves, so I became good at managing my sister's needs. Sometimes I would even pretend to be less capable in public to keep the balance. But as I grew out of my teenage years, I realized that continuing like this wasn't going to help me in the long run. I started pushing back against my parents and doing things my way. If I had kept going along with everything, I would have become someone who couldn't do anything. When I started standing up for myself, my sister didn't like it much because she was losing my support. But we never really had a bad relationship. We could still talk normally, and sometimes I even gave her advice when she had problems. Our family had its issues, like being too protective of my sister and a little bit of tension between us, but I still thought we were a pretty normal family. However, things changed when Paul didn't return my sister's feelings. She couldn't handle the fact that her younger sister was getting married before her. The night before my wedding, my sister blurted out to our parents, "I can't accept that my younger sister is getting married before me." My dad tried to calm her down, saying, "Don't worry, Laura. You'll find a good partner soon, too." I agreed with him. "Yeah, Laura, it's not a big deal." But she wasn't having it. Normally, the older sister gets married first, then the younger one. It's too soon for her. The wedding is tomorrow. I reminded her, "What are you talking about, Mom? Don't you care about me? I'll be the poor older sister who's left behind while her younger sister moves on." She cried. That night, I listened quietly from the hallway as my sister and our parents argued. Should my sister really get married first? If I waited for her to marry, I would end up growing much older without any progress in my own life. What was she thinking? I hoped she would calm down after venting her frustrations. Then I heard something shocking. "We won't attend the wedding tomorrow, Laura." Please be okay with that, my father said. What? Both my parents agreed not to come to my wedding, just to make my sister happy. I couldn't believe it. It was like they were under some spell, doing whatever she wanted. This went way beyond simply indulging her. Even then, my sister sighed, still not fully satisfied. Fine, I'll compromise. Let her have a wedding that nobody acknowledges. It was clear she didn't want me to marry Paul, likely because she had feelings for him. It was unbelievable that my parents wouldn't attend my wedding because of my sister's jealousy. The day of my wedding came, but I barely slept the night before. Instead of excitement, I felt anxious and uncomfortable, constantly thinking about what had happened. I'll never forget the satisfied smile on my sister's face when my parents told her they wouldn't be there at the venue. I had to explain to Paul and his parents why mine weren't coming. I apologized and said my sister doesn't support this marriage, so my family won't be attending. I told them it was heartbreaking to say that my own parents weren't coming to my wedding. My in-laws were shocked and couldn't believe there were parents who wouldn't attend their daughter's big day. After hearing my story, they stayed silent for a while. The mood felt so heavy, but then my mother-in-law gently took my hand, and my father-in-law placed his hand on top of ours. Remember, your family is here with you. Don't let this day be a sad one. Come on, why don't you smile? My mother-in-law said warmly. Her words made me tear up. Paul, seeing me cry, softly stroked my head and said, Ashley, I'm your husband now, so please stop saying that your family isn't here. My in-laws and Paul quickly tried to cheer me up, jokingly telling me not to cry because my makeup would smudge. Then my mother-in-law looked at me with kindness and said, Ashley, I know things are hard with your family back home, but this is the start of a new life. Let's build your own family together. Even though I felt abandoned, her words and her strong embrace gave me comfort. Paul and my father-in-law joined in with hugs, and I told myself that everything would be okay. Like my mother-in-law said, this was a new beginning. I promised myself that I would build my own happy family. On that day, I officially married Paul. 18 years have passed since that day. In that time, Paul and I had a daughter and 3 sons. Our daughter is capable and looks after her 3 mischievous brothers, who sometimes turn the house upside down. I surprise even myself with how often I end up shouting, "Stop it now." Paul's career has been going well. We bought a house and have been living a stable life. But then something unexpected happened. My father, mother, and sister showed up at our house after the wedding. I had kept my distance from them and hadn't given them our new address yet. Somehow, they found us and came unannounced. When they appeared, instead of a warm, long time no see, the first words out of my mouth were, "What do you want?" "I need a favor from you," my sister said. My parents added, "It's something only you can do for us," looking at me with serious expressions. I had no idea what they could possibly want after 18 years of silence. Half curious and half afraid, I wondered what was going on. I stayed quiet as my mom spoke up. "We want you to give Paul to your sister." "What?" Both Paul and I were stunned by her words. "Wait a minute. What do you mean I need to give Paul away?" I asked sharply. My parents both looked away, guilty, while my sister stood there, smug and proud. She's still single, and she's turning 45 this year. "That's a problem," my father said. His words made no sense to me, and Paul looked just as confused. Actually, my father continued, the company she worked for recently went out of business, and she's unemployed now. It's tough. We're worried about her future being single and without a job. We hope you understand. Since you're sisters, you should feel the same way. In my mind, I thought, no, I definitely don't think so. But I stayed silent, waiting to see what they would say next. I was getting frustrated with how slowly my father was speaking, but I held back from saying anything, eager to hear his point. She's always liked Paul, and she's still alone because of it. You've had your time with him. Could you let her have him for the rest of her life? What? Paul and I were speechless. My parents kept pleading, please, while my sister stood there confidently, certain she would get what she wanted. Given how my parents always catered to her, it made sense that she believed this, but the request was outrageous. As I put my head in my hands, Paul pulled me aside and whispered, this could actually be a chance. A chance? What do you mean? I asked. Well, remember that joke you made when you were drunk? It's like it's coming true, he said with a small grin. Then should we go with it? I asked. We stood up and turned back to face my sister and parents. Do you really love Paul that much? I asked. My sister was caught off guard. She blinked in surprise and repeated, yes, yes. I've loved him all this time. Wow, that's some serious love, I said. You've been in love with him for 18 years, even though he's married to me. Yes, she said. It's been so painful watching you and Paul together. It should have been me. Paul and I could barely hold back our laughter at her serious tone. I took a deep breath and said, all right, I give up. If you love him that much, I'll step aside. My parents were shocked. My mom quickly asked, really? Don't you love Paul too? No, actually, I said, looking at Paul. To be honest, I've always liked Laura. Paul played along, turning to my sister and saying, yeah, I've always liked her too. My sister's face lit up with joy. Really? She asked, her face flushed with excitement. I knew it. You never resisted when I hugged you, and your eyes always looked so loving, my sister said excitedly. I've been waiting for this moment, and finally it's here. I had to hold back my laughter, and I could see Paul pretending to cry, though his shoulders were shaking from trying not to laugh. We'll always be together from now on, Paul, my sister suddenly said, acting as if they had been a couple all along. She was so casual about it, like she'd been living in this fantasy for the last 18 years. Laura, I'm happy, Paul replied with a smile. Please be my support from now on. Yes, absolutely, she said, clearly thrilled. So I'm going to quit my job, Paul announced, grinning. My sister's smile faded in an instant, and her face turned to shock. Really? Yeah, I want to be with you all the time, Laura, so I'm quitting my job to always stay by your side. What? She stammered, clearly not expecting this. I won't even go outside anymore, Paul continued cheerfully. I'll follow you everywhere. I'll even watch you do housework. My sister froze for a moment, her panic setting in, while our parents looked visibly disturbed. But I'm not working either. This is a problem, she muttered. What's the problem? If we're together, we have nothing to fear. We don't need money to be happy, Paul replied. But nowadays we need to pay for things like insurance. It's not like the old days. We can't just live on love alone, she argued, her eyes starting to lose focus. Sensing the moment was right, I jumped in. Paul, if we end up divorcing, I'll be taking a large share of the assets, so you better pay up. Don't worry, Paul said with a laugh. Your sister and parents will take care of everything. Hearing this, my parents turned pale and exchanged worried glances. Laura, my father said, this is hard to admit, but this isn't right. Stealing your sister's husband is wrong. Exactly, Laura, my mom added, suddenly backing away from the plan. It was as if all the passion and support for my sister vanished in an instant. What are you talking about? You promised Paul to me. Laura yelled, her frustration growing. That was before. My father began, but she cut him off. I don't want to hear it. Doesn't anyone support me? Laura screamed, and in her frenzy, she grabbed my mom's hair. My father tried to calm her down, but it was chaos. In the middle of all this, Paul calmly spoke up. "Laura, to be honest, you're not my type. I respect you as Ashley's sister, but that's it." Everyone fell silent, their attention now on him. "I don't really want to interact much with you, especially when you look at me like that," Paul said. "That gaze actually turns me off. Knowing that someone has unreturned feelings for me is really uncomfortable." His honest words left my sister and parents speechless. "But Paul, what was all that earlier?" my sister asked, clearly confused. "Stop acting so casually with someone else's husband," I said firmly. "There's no way he could fall for you. We have a family, and we're happy." As I said this, I stopped my sister, who was walking toward Paul with a pale face. "You tricked me," she shouted. "How could you think that someone who hasn't contacted you in 18 years still loves you? Isn't that a bit unrealistic?" I asked. My sister's face turned red, and she started to tear up, clearly out of frustration. "If you were really attractive, maybe it would be different. But no one finds charm in someone who is unemployed, dependent on their parents, and can't do basic things because their mom has always done them. At your age, a marriage wouldn't last long with those traits," I said plainly. Paul quietly chuckled behind me. My sister, hit by the truth of my words, began to cry loudly, unable to stop. Our parents tried to comfort her, but they looked confused, as if they were realizing that what I said was true. "I'm not giving Paul to you," I continued, "so please give up." At that, she cried even harder, like a child throwing a tantrum. It was a sad sight for an adult, and it was clear she hadn't matured. "Take this as a lesson, and please don't involve yourself in our lives again," I said. "No matter what trouble you face in the future, don't expect any help from us." With that, I slowly closed the front door. When my children asked what happened, I simply said, "It's Halloween season, and it seems a ghost came early." My eldest suggested we exorcise the spirit, but I stopped the idea, though it did feel like there was a ghost wailing outside as my sister continued to cry. 6 years passed, and she's still single. She found a job but got fired for inappropriate behavior, and she caused trouble by rushing into a marriage that didn't work out. Now she's banned from matchmaking events and seems likely to stay single for life. My parents, despite being tired, are still working part-time jobs to save money for her. They've probably realized they can't rely on her to take care of them in the future. Hopefully, they now understand the consequences of spoiling her all these years. I spend my days as a homemaker without having to worry about school fees for my kids, thanks to my smart children and my husband, who has a stable job. Sometimes I wonder if working outside the home would help me burn off the extra calories I gained during the holiday season from eating too much. My daughter, who is already slim, is entering her growth phase and has been talking about wanting to go on a diet. I'm trying to convince her not to. "You can think about dieting when you're older, like me," I tell her. My 3 sons love dancing and recently showed off their skills at a local event where they won several awards. They proudly say, "We're going to be in Pearl Jam one day." So I really hope Pearl Jam stays together until they grow up. We regularly get visits from my in-laws, who are as dear to me as my own parents. We always enjoy delicious meals together. When the kids have their spring break, we plan to take a trip to a spa, and I'm excited about spending some quality time together. Although there were many challenges before marriage, my life since then has been filled with happiness. The bonds within our family have grown stronger, and I'm grateful for the love we share. I hope everyone stays healthy and lives long so we can continue to make precious memories together as a family. Hi there to all of you. I am your narrator, Rebecca. I want to tell you my tale today. I have my share of difficulties, just like many of you, especially with my mother-in-law, Emma. She's the kind that constantly pushes the boundaries that my husband, Anthony, and I have established and loves to be in charge. We struggle to enforce these limits in spite of our repeated warnings, which gives Emma tremendous control over our life for a long amount of time. She didn't express her hate for me or act rudely, but she did have her subtle ways of letting me know when she wasn't happy. Not only did she not hesitate to criticize my personal style, but oddly enough, she also did not hold back while discussing her own kid. She's done a lot of things without our permission, but our wedding stands out as one particularly noteworthy example. Emma decided to do all the changes herself, including the cake, flowers, and decorations. While we were able to prevent her from changing the location, we were forced to comply with her decisions on everything else or face financial damages. She would always respond, when questioned, by saying she thought she knew best and had better preferences. It was annoying and offensive that her costly tastes could not conceal her disrespect for our decisions. For his part, Anthony never considered breaking off communication. He found it difficult to confront his mother. I did my best to ignore her encroachments, and things were steady for a time. That is, until Emma discovered a fresh approach of voicing her thoughts. My partner, Anthony, and I finally purchased our ideal house after years of saving. I took great care to decorate it so that it reflected our personality, and it was just right for us. But Emma's response was everything but amusing. She said the apartment looked cheap and disgusting, criticizing our selections and the way we decorated it. She argued that we had consulted her, but we made it plain that we were happy with our home exactly the way it was, and that our decisions were definitive. We refused to back down in the face of her objections and promises to make our area more to her liking. We meant to maintain our house a reflection of ourselves, not hers. By posting this, I want to connect with people going through similar things as well as just rant. It serves as a reminder that although we have no control over the actions of others, we do have control over our own reactions and values. Emma's insistence that we make adjustments based on her recommendations has always annoyed me. But Anthony and I were determined to keep her out of our decision-making this time. We stood our ground through her incessant messages, calls, and unannounced visits. But Emma was never one to back down, and she came up with a more devious plan to break the silence. After years of saving, Anthony and I finally bought our house, so we decided to reward ourselves with a little trip out of state. We hadn't been able to go on a vacation in a very long time, so having a little extra cash felt like the ideal chance. While we were away, our house was meant to be unoccupied, but a nice man in his 70s from our neighborhood offered to watch it. We weren't anticipating any problems, but he promised to let us know if anything appears strange. You can imagine how shocked we were when he called to say he'd seen 4 women coming into our home. We were alarmed and asked for further information. One woman's description fit Emma perfectly. Anthony and I were perplexed and furious, and we needed to know what was going on. I gave Emma a straight call to confront her. "Why are you in our house, Emma? Our neighbor witnessed you and a few others entering." "Oh, I'll be staying here for 2 weeks with my friends. Just 4 of them," she casually said. "But don't worry, there won't be any crazy gatherings." We agreed that it would be pleasant to spend some time together. In addition, your home needs some maintenance. Consider it as your personal house visitor. We're not even at home, though. If we weren't present, why would you invite your buddies over? Perplexed, I inquired. Remain calm. I'll keep them entertained. Additionally, take into account that we are keeping your house safe in light of the previous break-ins in the area. This approach is preferable, particularly in light of all the riches Anthony and you own. Nothing going missing right now would be undesirable, would it? Emma thought to herself. Her explanation was somewhat valid, but her behavior was completely unwanted and intrusive. It was another example of her pushing limits under the cover of worry about our new house. I found her tone to be suspicious and unsettling during our talk. It felt too easy, the nonchalant way she brought up house-sitting, as if she had planned this visit long in advance. I had a few concerns when she showed up with pals without warning, even though I knew we weren't home. It seemed like she had entered our home with her key, and I feared to think of what may have occurred if our neighbor hadn't seen and let us know straight away. Although I was appreciative of his watchfulness, I couldn't get rid of the uneasy notion that made me wonder whether I was being too thankful. I told Anthony about my worries and how uneasy I felt that Emma was inviting strangers into our house. I found it difficult to grasp her intentions, and it simply didn't set right. Anthony seemed to take it in stride, believing it was fortunate that someone was looking after our home, which might deter burglaries. But my worries extended beyond the threat of theft. Emma's history of overstepping boundaries was well documented in our experiences with her, and this felt like another glaring example. He tried to reassure me, suggesting we address the issue with Emma once we returned home. He acknowledged that his reluctance to confront his mother had to change, especially given her recent actions. I understood his difficulty, knowing that Emma had raised him alone, but something had to give. I still felt anxious, not entirely reassured by Anthony's resolve. The following day, our neighbor's call only heightened my unease. He asked if we were still on vacation, and I explained Emma and her friends were at our house supposedly to keep it safe. His next words sent a chill down my spine. He reported hearing a lot of noise coming from our home, not the usual sounds of someone living there, but more akin to renovation work. This unexpected news left Anthony and me speechless, grappling with the implications of Emma's actions in our absence. The situation was becoming increasingly alarming, challenging our initial perceptions and forcing us to confront the unsettling reality awaiting us upon our return. The revelation from our neighbor made everything fall into place. Emma, my mother-in-law, had often expressed her disdain for my decorating skills, deeming them tasteless while insisting she knew better. Her sudden silence regarding our decor after learning about our short getaway now felt ominously significant. Anthony speculated about the nature of the noises, wondering if there might have been a misunderstanding. However, the neighbor's observations of delivery trucks and interior decoration items, along with the sight of Emma and her friends actively participating in the changes, left no room for doubt. It turned out that one of her companions was a known interior decorator, a detail that only deepened our suspicions. The thought of Emma taking it upon herself to overhaul our home's interior without our consent was heart-wrenching. Both Anthony and I were in a state of disbelief and panic. Grappling with the reality of her unwelcome intrusions, we expressed our gratitude to the neighbor for his vigilance and clarified that Emma's actions were unauthorized, underscoring the gravity of the situation. Overwhelmed by frustration and the urgent need to intervene, we knew we had to take action. I declared our vacation officially over. I couldn't enjoy another moment under the weight of this betrayal. Anthony shared my distress, apologizing for his mother's unrestrained actions and baffled by her choice to involve friends in this unwarranted project. Faced with no other option to halt Emma's endeavors before more damage was done, I contemplated involving the authorities. However, the thought of calling the police on Emma felt distressing for Anthony. Ultimately, the urgency of the situation outweighed our reservations. With Anthony's reluctant consent, I contacted the police to request a welfare check citing the ongoing disturbances reported by our neighbor. Although this decisive action felt drastic, it seemed to be the only viable way to protect our home from further unauthorized alterations. When I called the police, I refrained from disclosing my suspicions, but mentioned that my mother-in-law and her friends were staying at our house. Given the recent spike in burglaries, the police took my concerns seriously and conducted a welfare check. The feedback from the officers was nothing short of shocking. They reported that our home was in chaos, with ongoing demolition causing dust and damage everywhere. My carefully selected decorations were either mishandled or missing, a clear testament to their disregard for our belongings. Upon returning home, the reality was as bad as the police had described, if not worse. The images they shared revealed the extent of the havoc during our absence. Overwhelmed by the scene, I experienced an intense emotional breakdown, feeling inconsolable. Anthony, though deeply injured, managed to maintain his composure enough to engage directly with the police. He made it clear that his mother had massively overstepped by undertaking renovations without our permission, resulting in significant damage. The officers on site sympathized with her plight, acknowledging the financial and emotional toll of her unauthorized alterations. Faced with the choice of pressing charges for property destruction, Anthony and I agreed we wanted to hold Emma accountable for her actions. The police were supportive, offering to initiate the legal process on our behalf and promising to provide further documentation of the damage. In the meantime, we arranged for my sister to watch over the house until we could return. Anthony took charge, determined to ensure his mother faced consequences for her recklessness, while I unleashed every curse I could muster. In my state of distress, I struggled to find the right words to express my feelings about Emma. However, Anthony handled the situation with a level of calm and decisiveness that felt nothing short of heroic. He promptly arranged our return flights, determined to tackle the aftermath of Emma's intrusion as quickly as possible. Our immediate focus shifted to rectifying the chaos she had caused and beginning the arduous process of rebuilding what had been carelessly destroyed. Upon our arrival back in our hometown, we wasted no time and headed straight to the police station to take formal action against Emma's unauthorized renovations. We presented the officers with photographs showcasing our home's original state alongside the devastation she had inflicted. The officers were visibly appalled by the extent of the damage and suggested we pursue legal action for the havoc she had wreaked. My frustration and anger reached a boiling point as I became resolute in ensuring Emma learned a harsh lesson for her actions. Our decision to confront her at the police station, where she was being held, stemmed from a desire to face her directly and make her understand the gravity of her behavior. When we finally saw Emma, she responded with a feigned innocence and confusion, questioning why she had been incarcerated, as if she were unaware of the chaos she had caused. Her lack of remorse, coupled with her insistence that she was merely helping us by imposing her taste on our home, was infuriating. Anthony equally insensitively challenged her delusion head-on, confronting her audacity and utter disregard for our wishes and property. Emma's defense stripped with entitlement as she asserted her intentions were to enhance our home, completely oblivious to the personal and financial turmoil she had created. She even had the audacity to critique my taste, proposing to fix everything if released, unaware of the severity of her actions. However, our resolve was unyielding. We informed her that she would never be allowed near our home again, and that we were pressing charges for property destruction. It was in that moment that the reality of facing legal consequences seemed to dawn on Emma. Panic set in as she turned to Anthony, carefully trying to portray me as the villain for insisting on accountability and pleading for his intervention. Her desperate plea, however, fell on deaf ears. United in our decision, we were determined to see the legal process through, ensuring that Emma faced the repercussions for her unwarranted intrusion and alterations to our home. Watching her grasp the reality of her situation marked a pivotal moment in our stand against her overbearing and invasive behavior. Anthony unequivocally supported my stance, and as he spoke, I could see Emma's astonishment. "Mom, Rebecca's right," he asserted. "By transforming our home according to your preferences, you've disregarded our boundaries. It's time to face the consequences." After everything that had transpired, this was the final straw. Anthony firmly stated the breach of trust and respect that had occurred. Despite Emma's protests and her attempts to sway him with emotional appeals, he remained resolute. He emphasized the necessity of compensation for the sense of damage she had caused, highlighting the serious financial implications she now faced. When confronted with the reality of her actions and their consequences, Emma broke down. She hadn't anticipated the lawsuit or the significant dent it would make in her savings. Her tears and pleas for mercy were a stark contrast to her previous sense of entitlement. However, her claims of financial hardship did little to sway our decision. "You should have considered the consequences before taking such drastic actions," we countered. Her appeals for leniency, cloaked in claims of good intentions, were dismissed. Anthony and I recognized them for what they were: manipulation tactics. Our resolve remained firm, and despite Emma's tearful apologies and last-minute remorse, the damage to her home and our trust was irreparable. Leaving her at the police station, we returned home ready to rebuild from the turmoil she had caused. Emma's release on bail and her subsequent uninvited appearance at our home only reinforced our decision once again. Anthony firmly delineated our boundaries, insisting on no further contact. Emma's desperate attempts to regain favor only confirmed the necessity of our actions in setting these boundaries and holding her accountable. We made the decision to stay in our damaged but still livable house because we were determined to prevent more disruptions to our home, calm in future. We filed a lawsuit to demand compensation, and in the end, the judge found in our favor, ordering Emma to make large reparations. She just avoided jail time, but she was also mandated to pay our attorney's fees. Emma started crying again as the judge showed his contempt for her behavior. But any compassion we might have had for her had long ago faded. All she was doing was dealing with the fallout from her decisions. Emma's pals and other members of her social circle, who had been part of her scam, immediately stopped hanging out with her because they didn't want to be linked with her foolishness. Emma came to us in tears after the court's ruling, pleading for our forgiveness and expressing her sorrow over her financial situation, which had gotten worse because Anthony had stopped giving her assistance. Though he had generously granted her an allowance, he made the decision to stop it because of her destructive conduct and the ensuing legal issues. She begged fervently, emphasizing her precarious financial circumstances, but we were unmoved. Anthony remained steadfast in his determination and emphasized the need of accepting responsibility for one's conduct. Emma proposed that we move into our guest room as a way to patch things up and maybe get our finances back on track, but we flatly refused. Anthony signaled that she was no longer welcome in our house or in our life, indicating that we would need some time to recover and reevaluate where she fit in, if there was still room for her. Emma's amazement and despair at Anthony's position culminated in a tearful incident outside our door. But we were determined to break things up since we had personally seen her deceptive behavior. In the months that followed, we felt a renewed sense of tranquility. Anthony and I were able to adopt a more carefree and optimistic attitude on life, since Emma's critical presence was no longer there. This experience made us think about keeping this distance indefinitely in the hopes of a future devoid of conflict and meddling. In the hopes that this choice would help us live the happy, fulfilled life we've always imagined, We look for guidance and understanding as we travel through this process. It appears that you have amassed a substantial fortune, roughly $500 million. Everyone is enthusiastic right now and has started to make great plans. It seems like you're creating a lavish house with a dream kitchen on the horizon. Your mother-in-law is utterly fascinated by the concept. In the meantime, your spouse has made the decision to quit his work in order to launch a company with what he believes to be Cheryl's inheritance. Wait a minute, though. Cheryl hasn't really inherited anything yet. You're thinking of leaving your current position and going full-time into construction, but something doesn't seem right. Why launch these ventures headlong without any real funding? You obviously have some money, but before we go all in on building a house, how about taking the family on a vacation? How does your father-in-law's suggestion of a trip to Hawaii sound? It seems like they want to do anything they want with the money you got from your mother, which would add even another level of complication to the situation. It enrages me to think of it. Although you're furious, you're not sure how to respond to the circumstance. To better grasp how things transpired, let's go back a few months. I'm a 36-year-old high school teacher by the name of Cheryl. Cherry, my spouse, is a year my senior and works in an office. 8 years have passed since we exchanged vows, and our daughter Sarah was born soon after. Since then, juggling obligations to family and career has been a busy part of life. We're going to see my mother in the hospital today. Sarah greets us with, "Hey, Grandma. It's been a while." Sarah's mother gives her a kind smile and runs her fingers over her hair. She appears weaker, and her once vibrant visage appears a little muted. A man dressed in a suit is standing next to her bed. When our eyes connect, he nods to me and walks out of the room silently. "Who was that, Mom?" Curiosity sparked, I inquire. "Oh, it's just a person I know." She tells me nothing to worry about in a soothing manner. And with that, she looks up at us. "Hey, Cheryl, how are you? And what's Jerry's status?" She grins and her kind blue eyes sparkle, reminding me of the courage she's always displayed. She got to know my dad when he was employed in the import-export industry abroad. She moved to marry him in Canada and started the difficult task of parenting a child in a foreign land. They overcame it together in spite of the challenges, which is evidence of their love and resiliency. My mother was my best teacher when I was a child, imparting in me the morals and knowledge that allow me to become a teacher today. I have the utmost gratitude for my parents' caring and encouraging upbringing. My mom has been managing her health problems and many hospital admissions since my father tragically died away a few years ago. After a while, she gave a cousin ownership of the family company, and these days she spends most of her days in the privacy of her hospital room. "Mom, I'm doing well. Do you require anything at all?" During one of our trips, I inquired. She says, "Just having you and Sarah here is more than enough," and her grin makes me happy. Following some time spent catching up, Sarah, who is now at that difficult stage of developing independence, excitedly provides updates on her studies and the most recent book she has read. I see a brilliant and honest youngster in her, even without my biased parent goggles, and I'm happy of how she's developing. Jerry says, "Hey, welcome back," when Sarah and I get home. "How is my mother faring?" "Same as usual," I reply, then ask him how his day went. "How did your seminar go?" "It was reportedly an excellent one." Jerry has been going to lectures lately about leaving his work to launch a side business. Despite the fact that we are getting by well on my teaching salary, it appears like he is wanting more money. His increasing fixation with monetary rewards, which I believe he inherited from his parents, worries me. They have never been big on presents, not even for holidays like Christmas. Instead, they frequently ask us for little loans. Fortunately, they live far enough away for us to not see each other very often. Jerry helps out around the house, so things are still doable. Our modest existence with my mom, Jerry, and Sarah gives me comfort. Then everything changed one day when the hospital called. Mom was in critical condition when her health unexpectedly declined. We hurried to be with her. "Cheryl, I've always wanted you to be happy," she continued, looking at me with what was left of her strength. Observe Sarah. Her comments stuck in my head as we acknowledged her precarious condition. She said, "She means everything. I love you," before passing away. These kind words were left for us by my mother, who had given her entire life to raising me and who had loved Sarah more than anything. Seeing her calm face during the burial brought me to tears, and Sarah, who was at my side, started crying too. A while after Mom died, I received an envelope from a legal practice with an odd return address on it. To my surprise, I found my mother's will inside, which bequeathed everything to me. I was very surprised by the terms of the will because Mom and I had never talked about inheritance. With the letter in hand, I determined that the best way to learn the specifics was to pay a visit to the legal office alone. Upon arriving, I was greeted by Mr. Roy, the attorney. "Hi, I'm Mr. Roy," he introduced himself. He wore glasses, the same man who had been in the hospital room when I visited my mom. "You were there when I visited my mom," I stated, recognizing him immediately. "Yes, we met briefly," Mr. Roy confirmed. "Your mom entrusted me with something very important," he added softly, his words almost bringing me to tears again. $500 million. I blurted out in shock upon hearing the figure he mentioned. "Yes, Cheryl. When your dad passed, you let your mom handle all the inheritance. Now, with what she saved and what she's left you after taxes, that's the sum," Mr. Roy explained. I was aware my parents had been well off, but I had never involved myself with their financial matters or asked for money after getting married. "It's overwhelming," I admitted, feeling slightly dizzy from the revelation, "but I see it as a sign of love from my mom." "I'll leave it in your hands, Mr. Roy. My mom cared about you deeply, and she asked me to assist you if needed. Feel free to talk to me about anything," Mr. Roy offered kindly. "Thank you. I really appreciate it," I responded, nodding to Mr. Roy before leaving the room. As the 50th day memorial of my mother approached, Jerry, my husband, began to mention my mother's inheritance frequently. He knew they had been wealthy when we married, but his constant probing became increasingly uncomfortable, especially during my mourning period. Whenever I asked him to drop the subject, he would oblige, only to subtly bring it up again later. His persistence felt intrusive and out of place. As I tried to navigate my grief at her mother's memorial, the atmosphere was already emotionally charged when Jerry's in-laws added another layer of complexity. Her father-in-law approached her with an offer. "Cheryl, if you're worried about handling the inheritance, we're here to help. We've been through inheritance disputes. They can get pretty complicated, especially with unmarried siblings involved." Her mother-in-law joined in, eager to assist. "We're here for you, Cheryl." Despite their offers, Cheryl felt uneasy about involving them, as she had never relied on them in financial matters before. She managed only a vague response, as they seemed to assume she needed their help. 2 months after her mother's passing, Jerry broke his silence on the matter. His sudden inquiry, "Have you gotten your mom's inheritance yet?" sent a chill through Cheryl. She hesitated before replying, "Not yet." It's a complicated process, but Jerry, seemingly frustrated, quickly ended the conversation and went to bed, leaving Cheryl with a sinking feeling. The next day, while Cheryl and her daughter Sarah were cleaning up after dinner, the doorbell rang. Sarah scurried to answer it, and Cheryl, peeking from the kitchen, saw her in-laws arriving with Jerry just returning from work. "Why are they here?" Cheryl whispered to Sarah, feeling a mix of surprise and anxiety. "It's okay, Mom. I'll go to my room," Sarah said, dashing off nervously as Cheryl greeted her in-laws at the door. Her father-in-law, Mr. Roy, burst in cheerfully, not waiting for an invitation. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and announced, "We're here to celebrate. You inherited over $500 million. We've even started building a duplex for all of us to live in, complete with your dream kitchen. Be happy, Cheryl," her mother-in-law added dreamily. Just imagine a beautiful duplex. Cheryl stood there overwhelmed, not only by the news of her inheritance, but also by their forwardness, and the realization that decisions were being made about her life and finances without her consent. The situation was quickly spiraling beyond her control. I found out that Jerry had unilaterally decided to put down half of our savings and some of the money his parents had saved up for a loan, all in his name, but expected it to be covered by my yet-to-be-received inheritance. He beamed with a mix of pride and anticipation as he announced his plans. "I've quit my job, and I'm starting a business with your inheritance," he said as if it was all settled. I was stunned. Wait a minute. What's going on? I haven't even received any inheritance yet, and you're talking about quitting your job and building a duplex. Let's not beat around the bush. It's clear you have an inheritance, Jerry argued, suggesting a celebratory trip to Hawaii amidst the unfolding chaos. As the conversation continued, it became evident that Jerry and my mother-in-law were on the same page, both eerily aligned with Mr. Roy's plans. Jerry, with a tone tinged with condescension, laughed. "You're being miserly, Cheryl. We looked into it because you kept saying you hadn't received the inheritance yet. If you don't claim it within 2 months, you can't refuse it, so you've definitely inherited it." With everyone assuming control over funds, I hadn't even claimed they started making plans for living comfortably off my supposed inheritance, over $500 million, according to my father-in-law's rough estimate. "Thanks, Mom, and make sure to arrange money for the duplex in my capital," Jerry said, seemingly oblivious to how overwhelming and inappropriate his demands were. Hearing Jerry speak like that left me reeling. I was furious and deeply hurt by their entitlement to my mother's legacy, intended for me, not for their lavish fantasies. Sarah, who was still in the other room, was my main concern as I tried to maintain my composure. Needing to escape, I excused myself. "I'm stepping out for a bit." They hardly noticed, engrossed in their discussion about the inheritance. I left the house and walked to the local hilltop park. The night air was brisk. As I reached the solitude of the park, tears began to flow. Alone, I cried silently, the cool air mixing with the hot tears streaming down my face as I grappled with feelings of frustration and exploitation amidst the turmoil. Thoughts of a potential divorce surfaced, but the image of Sarah held me back. My mother's parting words, "Take care of Sarah above all else," echoed in my mind, grounding me in my resolve to protect her happiness and well-being above everything else. As I wept on the hilltop, someone approached me. Startled, I looked up to find a gentle presence whose soft words brought a measure of calm. Feeling the newfound resolve after that night, I called my husband and in-laws to meet at a restaurant that offered private rooms. As soon as I arrived, Jerry blurted out, "So you're back home. Did you withdraw the money? Cheryl, you shouldn't just leave without telling your husband." Ignoring their insinuations, I placed a document on the table. It was a filled-out divorce notice. Jerry's face drained of color as he stammered, "What? What's this?" "I want a divorce," I said calmly but firmly, cutting through the tension. Jerry's panic was evident, and my in-laws exchanged anxious looks. "You can't just leave us like this. Jerry exclaimed. "Ever since you inherited from your mom, you've become so greedy," he accused. I looked them straight in the eyes. "Ever since I inherited, you've been out of control, quitting jobs, planning to live off my money, using my savings to fund my dreams, and now planning extravagant trips without consulting me. Tell me who really changed when the money came into the picture. You can't just divorce me out of nowhere," Jerry argued, his tone desperate. "Half of everything is mine, including our savings and half of the inheritance." As they pressed in with their demands, the door suddenly opened. Sarah and attorney Mr. Roy entered, bringing a sudden hush over the room. "Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, you should know better," Sarah said with a maturity beyond her years. Mr. Roy stepped forward. "Inheritance isn't shared property, right?" Mr. Roy nodded, stepping forward. "I'm attorney Mr. Roy, and Cheryl's mom entrusted me with her legal matters. I've been advising Cheryl," he stated formally, leaving Jerry flustered. "Indeed," Mr. Roy continued, "inherited property isn't shared. It's not subject to division." "What? That can't be right. Is this a mistake?" Jerry stuttered, confusion written all over his face. Their reactions confirmed their deep-seated belief that they were entitled to my inheritance. This misunderstanding, this entitlement, was all the more reason for me to pursue the divorce. I needed to protect not only my future, but also Sarah's, ensuring our lives were free from this toxic sense of entitlement. "I'll stick by you no matter what," my husband shouted, his eyes bloodshot, his voice disregarding the gravity of the situation. "Stop it." Sarah intervened calmly, a quiet strength in her voice that cut through the tension. "Ever since Mom inherited, Dad hasn't thought about her once. Grandpa only cares about the money. They never even mention me. I can't see them as a family anymore." Jerry and my in-laws were visibly shocked by Sarah's words. When the inheritance issue had first upset me, Sarah had been the one to comfort me, saying, "Dad, Grandpa, and Grandma are wrong. They're trying to take Grandma's legacy. Mom, I'm with you. Let's face this together." Bolstered by her support, I contacted Mr. Roy, our attorney, to arrange this very meeting. Sarah's declaration seemed to strike a chord, but Jerry attempted to sway her. "That's not true. Sarah, Dad wants what's best for you." In-laws chimed in, "Wouldn't you be happier with us?" My in-laws chimed in, "Children shouldn't interfere." With a look of resolute frustration, Sarah responded, "I'm going with Mom. I can't stay with you anymore." She turned away decisively. "We've made our decision. Sarah and I will leave," I stated calmly, which only fueled Jerry's anger. "I've never cheated, and you can't force a divorce. I'll get a lawyer. We'll get that money," he threatened, his desperation palpable. "I'll handle it from here." Mr. Roy intervened quietly, his tone steady and reassuring. "The crux here is whether there are serious grounds for ending the marriage." Quitting his job, using our savings without consent, making decisions unilaterally, and Sarah's expressed distress. These are multiple arguments to support our case. Additionally, your daughter has recorded evidence of all of you pressuring Cheryl for her inheritance. That should serve as compelling evidence. Jerry slumped, defeated, and my in-laws' faces went pale. After that, Sarah and I left the restaurant, our path forward clear. A year later, thanks to Mr. Roy's diligent efforts, my divorce from Jerry was finalized. Sarah and I moved into my mother's old house, finding peace and a fresh start far from the conflicts and the greed that had marred the previous years. The strength and clarity that Sarah showed that day in the restaurant had set us on this new path, one that we walked together, strengthened by each other's resolve. Our calm was complicated by the relics of the past that kept coming to light despite our new beginning. Jerry wrote many letters, pleading for a reunion in each one. Even more unsettling was the fact that he was spotted close to Sarah's school, a sighting that seemed too familiar. Fearing about our security and privacy, we pursued legal action. We were able to get a restraining order against Jerry because to the unwavering assistance of our lawyer, Mr. Roy. This firm move helped mitigate the unwelcome incursions and brought some serenity back into our lives. We learned through the grapevine that Jerry and my in-laws had moved forward with their plans and constructed the duplex of their dreams. However, they had not anticipated such an exquisite existence in their new house. My in-laws, who had previously retired, were forced to return to work and took jobs at a nearby factory in order to make ends meet. Jerry ended himself working physical labor, despite his prior plans to live a nice life supported by my inheritance. The family was a little unpopular in their new neighborhood, according to neighbors who whispered that the duplex's walls frequently resonated with the sounds of recurrent conflicts. In the meantime, Sarah and I kept creating a calm life far from the chaos of my previous family relationships. Our house was a haven of harmony and encouragement to one another. Sarah's dreams have just crossed continents. She said how much she wanted to study overseas in my mother's country, a place I was really attached to. This concept resonated with us, both because it offered an opportunity to cut any remaining connections to Jerry and his invasive efforts at making amends. Inspired by Sarah's aspirations and our mutual desire for a new beginning, we made the decision to relocate abroad. We made the choice to start this new chapter in our life by using some of my mother's legacy, which I think she would have been fully in favor of. I was extremely proud of Sarah when she flourished academically and socially at her new school. She made a fantastic adjustment. Getting a job as a teacher in our new house and seizing the chance to reconstruct our life and mold young minds brought me a sense of fulfillment as well. The peace and stability we felt as we got used to our new routine in this new nation were immense. Every calm day strengthened our resolve to move on from the past and look forward to the future with optimism. With hope for the future and confidence in our ability to assist one another, we eagerly anticipated starting our adventure in this new country. I'm Lauren, and I'm 33 years old. Being a housewife, I can't help but reflect on my life as I stand here now. It resembles a network composed of several strands representing responsibilities, standards, and the silent sacrifices made by the people we care about. My father is an important part of my narrative as well as me. He was a nice and polite man who, without really realizing it, got sucked into the responsibilities of my married life. Life was easier 6 years ago. Along with my husband, Jack, and his mother, Cheryl, I shared a cozy little home on the outskirts of the city. Although this may seem like a nice family setting to you, there is a problem. There was an unwritten rule in that house that my father had to pay for everything. Each month, he discreetly paid all of our bills. Even though he never expressed complaints or discomfort, I could tell how difficult it was for him. It was difficult to live with Jack and Cheryl. It resembled tightrope walking. Cheryl never concealed what she expected, even with her cutting remarks and forceful presence. This way, Lauren, it's better, she would frequently comment. It keeps the family comfortable, and your father can afford it. Her voice always indicated that this was more of an order than a request. Jack, for his part, remained silent and let events unfold. His quiet was insistent, as though he already agreed with all that was said without having to express it. I believed in the promises I made to Jack when we were married, and I loved him even if it was difficult. I stayed in that house because of it, holding out hope that something would improve. I hoped for a change every day. I was hoping for a sign that things would turn around and that we might truly become a family, bonded by love rather than possessions. However, I knew in my heart that I was clinging to an unreal fantasy. It was a fiction, and the weight of unwritten guidelines and forced grins was gradually crushing it. I can't believe how much those years shaped me as I sit here reflecting back on them. They imparted to me lessons on resilience and the bittersweet realities of family and love. But I still had a long way to go in living my toughest life. Everything started with a phone call that had a profound impact. My world collapsed on the day my father passed away. I recall every little thing as though it were yesterday. I hurried to the hospital after receiving the urgent phone call. It felt like they were mourning with me since the hallways were deserted and chilly. My father passed away before I could say goodbye to him due to an unexpected heart attack, despite the medical professionals' best efforts. He died, and I was enveloped by intense sadness for several days. Not only did I lose my father, but I also lost the cornerstone of my existence. He had been my pillar of support, the silent power that got me through every trying time. I felt adrift without him. After then, everything was different. My father had always supported me, and now he was no longer with me. Not only was I grieving for him, but I was also missing the security and stability he had given. I felt as like everything in my world had changed, and I didn't know how I would manage without him. I had a disoriented feeling, as though I was adrift in an uncontrollably turbulent sea of feelings. My father's attorney called me during this trying period. I was invited to his office to discuss my father's will with him. It seemed unnatural for me to consider making a will when I was still in mourning. Everything appeared cold and structured when I got to the lawyer's office, which was the exact opposite of how I felt. The lawyer went over what my father had left for me, his only child, as I sat there in quiet. He informed me that I had been bequeathed $80 million by my father, along with a stunning home in one of the city's most exclusive areas. The sum of money was so enormous that it appeared unreal. It was hard for me to believe. I even harbored a small yearning that there had been some sort of error. I felt this bequest was a big burden when I returned home. I could sense a difference as soon as I walked through the door. My mother-in-law, Cheryl, had changed her customary expression on me from one of calculation and coldness to one of avarice. Her voice brimming with contrived pity, she cornered me in the living room. "Lauren," she began, but her tone quickly hardened and demanded, "You must give Jack the home and move the $80 million into my account. It's in the family's best interests." Her demand hovered like a heavy fog in the atmosphere. My mother-in-law wasn't providing me with any consolation or support, and I was still dealing with the grief of losing my father. Rather, she viewed this as an opportunity to take care of her kid and herself. The arrogance of her to expect me to give up all my father had left me was beyond me. It dawned on me then that their generosity had never been genuine. Rather, it had lasted as long as my father could support us. I spoke with more strength in my voice than I actually had, saying, "I can't do that, Cheryl. My father gave me the house, and that money is his parting gifts. Nobody can take that away from me, I promise." Cheryl's countenance first twisted with amazement, then became angry. With a menacing tone in her voice, she took a step towards me. "Lauren, you're going to regret this choice. I swear to you that." The home felt smaller as I stood there, not bowing to her demands. I had the impression that the walls were closing in on me, that a storm was approaching. For the first time, I had defied Cheryl, but I was unsure of the price. I prepared myself for whatever came next, since I knew that my life was going to be completely flipped upside down. The consequences of my choice were severe and swift. The house I lived with Jack and Cheryl turned into a war zone in a matter of days. There was an intense atmosphere of animosity, and there were many accusations in the stillness between us. The guy I had loved and trusted, Jack, now looked at me with bitterness and uncertainty. He appeared divided between the life we had created together and his mother's machinations. One chilly morning, things came to a breaking point when Jack gave me the divorce papers. He was unable to look me in the eye, yet his hands were solid. He muttered, seemingly to himself, "Lauren, this is how it has to be." My heart was already injured from everything I had gone through, so his comments felt like a knife to it. Though I was shocked that it had come to this, I knew in my heart that this was the price I would have to pay for advocating for myself. That's when it dawned on me that I wasn't simply losing a spouse. I was being discarded because I didn't fit into their ideal version of me. I shook my hand and signed the divorce papers. More than just a mark on paper, my signature signified the close of one chapter in my life and the beginning of an unknown one. Cheryl was waiting for me in the doorway, grinning smugly as I picked up my belongings to depart. "You brought this on yourself," she continued, her harshness evident in her voice. Her remarks hurt, but I said nothing. Knowing that I was leaving behind a life in which I was never truly respected, I simply continued packing. I moved into the house my father had left for me once the divorce was finalized, and I became an independent person. It was a grand mansion, vastly different in size from the little cottage I'd just been kicked out of. I was alone myself in this large house, with its vacant rooms and winding halls, and I was having trouble getting back to normal. Even though it seemed awkward and lonely at times, I had to remind myself that this was my new beginning when the solitude became oppressive. But problems from life continued to come my way. I found very shortly after I moved in that Jack had suffered a serious injury at work. He was a security guard when an incident occurred, breaking his leg. I couldn't help but notice the irony. He was jobless and defenseless now, but he had formerly been powerful and self-assured. Jack arrived at my home a few days later, hobbling on crutches. His expression was desperate. He appeared to be an entirely different person from the one I had previously adored. With a timid, unsure voice, he whispered, "Lauren, I need help. I'm not good, but I've made mistakes. I have nowhere else to go, and I am unable to work." His eyes were filled with agony, and a part of me wanted to assist him. He seemed to be looking to me for forgiveness and support while he put the pieces back together. However, the scars from our history were still too recent. I could not ignore the betrayal. It was still too profound. I had discovered the hard way that, despite how painful it was to say no, I had to prioritize taking care of myself. I apologized to Jack, maintaining a calm tone of voice despite the tempest inside of me. "I am unable to. I now have to make my decision after you made yours." I felt as though I was shutting the door on my former existence when I closed the door on Jack. The last link to that traumatic chapter was vanished. It was time for me to turn my attention to reconstructing my life, not simply my house. I knew that I had to go forth, stronger and more resolute than before, since the path was mine to take alone. The quiet, empty rooms of the house my father left me no longer felt so lonely, as I became used to my new situation. Rather, they began to feel incredibly optimistic. This property offered me a fresh start with its lovely gardens and well-lit halls. There I would rediscover who I was. I was prepared for the hardships that were ahead. My past hardships had instilled in me the trait of resilience. It was time for me to take charge of my life and start living it how I wanted. This was my opportunity to become stronger and wiser and build a future that genuinely belonged to me by rising from the ashes. I started to see a different goal for my life, one that would benefit others in addition to aiding in my recovery. I considered making an inviting and secure environment for senior citizens without a dwelling of their own. My father's desire to always support the community served as the inspiration for this concept. I wanted to respect his strong desire to give back. I made the decision to build an aging residence on my acreage. In addition to giving them a place to stay, I wanted to create a vibrant, welcoming community where they could exchange laughs, knowledge, and tales. I envisioned it as a place where individuals might genuinely enjoy their senior years and feel at home. I gave the estate my whole attention and invested all of my resources and passion. I worked on every room, making sure that each space felt comfortable and welcoming. Every small detail mattered, from the first furniture to the decorations. I wanted the house to feel like a place full of warmth and kindness. The work was hard and tiring, but at the same time, it was incredibly rewarding. With every new thing I added to the home, I felt a bit of my old pain healing. The physical effort of renovating the house was also healing for my emotional wounds. As I worked day by day, I finally started to accept the end of my marriage and the betrayal that came with it. I realized that building this new home was not only creating a future for others, but also helping me move forward from my past. As the house neared completion, I started meeting the people who might move in. Each elderly person I spoke to had a unique story to share, and their faces showed a lifetime of experiences. There was hope in their eyes, and I could see they were looking forward to this new chapter in their lives. I listened closely to their stories, which were full of strength, resilience, and life lessons. Soon, the house started to fill with its new residents. The once empty rooms were now alive with conversation and laughter. One of the first residents, Mrs. Teresa May, stood out. She was an energetic 85-year-old with bright eyes and a love for storytelling. She quickly became the heart of our little community, sharing stories from her youth that were both funny and wise. Every evening, she would gather everyone in the common room, filling the space with laughter and sometimes even a few tears. One evening, while we were watching the sunset from the porch, Mrs. May turned to me and said, "It's all about making the most of every day, dear." Her words hit me deeply, reminding me that time is precious, and it's important to live every moment fully. In this new life, I found joy in the simple things. We shared meals together, celebrated birthdays, and spent time just listening to each other. The house was no longer just a building. It had become a living, breathing community. The people who lived there had created a home filled with love and connection, woven together by the shared experiences of their lives. This lively community helped me rediscover who I am. I had let go of the hurt from the past and was looking forward to the future with hope. I was prepared for the next challenge. Not only had the house fulfilled my father's ambition, but it had also fostered a community. I discovered pleasure, healing, and a fresh sense of purpose in life by realizing this ambition. I felt so at ease since I had discovered a new purpose. I felt like I had a new beginning and was at home for the first time in years thanks to the small act of assisting others. My heart shifted with the seasons. Under my direction, the senior home flourished, and every day I felt greater happiness and love all around me. Every chuckle, every grin, every tale told by the folks who now called it home warmed my heart. One day, while going about my daily business of managing the household money at the neighborhood bank, fate had an unexpected surprise in store for me. I paused for a second when I saw the bank manager's expression as I approached his desk. "Scott," I answered, a hint of astonishment in my voice. It was my boyhood friend, Scott. With the same kind smile and kind eyes that had previously comforted me, he sat behind the desk looking every bit the professional. We had a lot of wonderful memories from our school days together when we were younger. After all these years, here he finally was. He exclaimed, "Lauren, it's been ages," with sincere joy in his voice. As soon as we got to speak, We caught up on everything that had elapsed throughout the years. Time seemed to have stopped completely. We chuckled as we reminisced about our childhood, when we would race bicycles around the neighborhood streets and had afternoon conversations about our aspirations. But we were no longer those innocent kids. After we had grown up, we had rather different lifestyles. Our bank meetings increased in frequency over time. Our bond became stronger each time we got together. Soon after, Scott began to show interest in the job I was doing and began to visit the senior home. His visits meant a lot to me because he wasn't just being kind. He actually cared about the patients, and he made everyone he came into contact with happy and laughing. Scott's serene and unwavering presence seemed like a breath of fresh air to me following all the challenging and traumatic relationships I had experienced. Having someone who was trustworthy, polite, and considerate felt wonderful. He actually interacted with me and the people in my life, not simply listened to me. He was loved by the elderly and became a frequent visitor who made them smile every day. As we frequently did, we strolled around the house's grounds one cool fall evening. The leaves were beginning to turn color, painting the ground in tones of orange and gold, and the air was cold. Scott abruptly stopped and turned to face me as we were walking. There was tenderness in his solemn look, and it was obvious that he was thinking about something significant. "Lauren," he said, his hands fumbling tensely with a tiny box he had taken out of his pocket. "You've made me and other people really happy, and I've seen that you do the same for me. I find it impossible to envision my life without you. Are you going to marry me?" My breath left me when he said it. I was shocked not just by the idea, but also by how accurate it seemed. For so long, Scott had been a part of my life, first as a buddy, and now as much more. He had seen me at my best and worst, and even though he knew me better than most, he still desired to live out the rest of his days with me. "Yes, Scott," I said, a smile on my face and tears in my eyes. I became aware of how far I had gone from loss and grief at that very moment. I had discovered a new love in addition to a new mission. Scott served as a reminder that although life might take unexpected detours, occasionally those detours carry us to precisely the right place. With a calm yet passionate voice, I answered, "Yes, I will marry you." My heart felt content at that very moment. I discovered someone who wanted to spend the rest of their life with me, someone who actually saw me for who I was. The seemingly insignificant word yes meant so much to me. It was a pledge to Scott and a pledge to myself to accept pleasure and love in the wake of all the suffering and difficulties I had encountered. Our nuptials were a modest yet exquisite event. We decided to have it in the same grounds where Scott had asked us to marry. We had grown to love those gardens as a haven of tranquility and beauty. We invited the folks who had grown to be like family to meet the folks who worked at the old people's home I had built, as well as a few close friends. The vista was enchanted by the sun's lowering golden colors, giving the impression that the heavens were endorsing our union. I made a promise of love and dedication to Scott as we stood beneath the waning light. It was flawless. It wasn't a big occasion with plenty of hype. It was authentic, heartfelt, and true. We committed to being there for one another during good times and bad, to always be kind, and to help one another. I had a gut feeling that Scott was the companion I had been waiting for my entire life. Living with Scott gave me a feeling of fulfillment. I was ignorant before to this. It was about feeling entire, not simply about happiness. Together, we tackled the tiny problems that come with daily living, such as little household repairs and taking care of duties at the senior citizen's home. But we always faced challenges together, no matter what they were. When I needed it, Scott was always there to provide a sympathetic ear or a helpful hand. He was also quite nice. The house, which represented my new beginning earlier, now represents our future together. The love and happiness that had grown between us appeared to be reflected in every nook and cranny of the house. The same hallways that had resonated with my isolation were now alive with warmth from a loving household, laughing and discussion. I was thankful for each step that had brought me to this point, since I could clearly see how much my life had changed. As I reflected on my path, I saw how far I had come from the depressing and uncertain days following my father's passing, and my trying divorce to the happiness and serenity I currently experienced. It was an amazing metamorphosis. Despite all the obstacles I had to overcome, life had taught me something important at every step. My previous suffering made it easier for me to recognize the joy and beauty in my current existence. I might not have appreciated the importance of what I had right now if I had never experienced those trying times. I'd become stronger, more resilient, and more conscious of the value of compassion, love, and community as a result of the difficult times. I came to understand that although life has many unexpected turns, every stride I have taken has led me one step closer to my destiny. My creation, the senior home, too became a unique aspect of our trip. It was now a vibrant community rather than merely a location where people lived. I considered the residents to be family, and they had accepted Scott into their hearts in the same way that they had accepted me. Everyone who lived in our house, not just us, left behind a legacy of love, laughter, and memories. Every day became significant because of the feeling of connection and belonging. I used to think a lot about the strength of fresh starts. Every morning served as a reminder to me that there are countless opportunities in life. Whatever obstacles or misfortunes we encounter, there is always potential for improvement and optimism. Change is something to welcome with open arms, rather than something to be afraid of. That was a lesson I had to learn the hard way, but I was glad I had. Together, Scott and I started making plans for the future, eagerly anticipating what was ahead. We had aspirations of growing the senior home and turning it into an even more welcoming haven for those in need. My father's desire was the same as ours, to keep helping others. I felt as though I was carrying on part of my father's heritage by realizing this ambition. I was confident that the life I had created and the decisions I had taken would have made him proud. Scott and I had a strong sense of purpose together. It was about the love we shared with the people surrounding us, as well as our love for one another. We had discovered a method to combine our delight with a purpose that offered our life more significance. Every day seemed like a gift, full with happy and meaningful experiences. I feel at ease thinking about the days that lie ahead. I have Scott by my side and a community that is built on love and respect. So I know that even though life will continue to provide problems, I have the power to overcome them. I'm excited for whatever is ahead. I have learned to welcome the changes and the chances they bring, so I am no longer fearful of what lies ahead. Ultimately, I am incredibly appreciative of everything that helped me get here, good and bad. I couldn't have enjoyed the beauty of my current existence without the sorrow. I am reminded of how far I have come with every day, and I am confident that the trip ahead will be full of love, laughter, and limitless opportunities. There are always surprises in life, and I'm prepared for whatever happens next.